Welcome to this series of podcasts on the beauty and power of liturgical art. Created through the Chichester Workshop for Liturgical Art and our associates, we explore how God reveals himself to us through the material world, and how we, as a union of matter and spirit, can worship God through works of material beauty.
Well, greetings, listeners and viewers. I have with me Ian Knowles, a British icon painter who now lives in Italy, but he'll tell us more about himself in a minute. And the subject, I thought, of our discussion today would be the role of medieval British iconography, particularly wall painting, and perhaps we'll discuss some illuminated manuscripts as well, and how this can inspire contemporary iconography. A lot of these podcasts in the Chichester Workshop for Liturgical Art is to inspire decision makers, priests, bishops, committee members, first of all, of the importance of liturgical art, visual liturgical art we're talking about as distinct from music, but also once we've agreed that it is really important that visual liturgical art is not just an optional extra to put in the corners left over, but it's an essential part of worship. The Lord incarnate himself in flesh, and therefore the material world is an important part of us being fully human and the church being the church. So the question then is, how do you do it? What is beauty, etc. So Ian, whom I've known a long time, has been a practicing iconographer for many years, and I wanted to discuss with them and explore together some older works from Britain. We have one particular church in mind, which you'll see in a minute. So Ian, welcome to us. And can you tell us a bit about yourself, how long you've been making icons for and so on?
I've been dabbling since I was about 18, and trundled off to Athens, visiting some friends. And I come from an Anglican background, though I'm a Catholic now, and was always fascinated by art in churches. I had a great love for Coventry Cathedral and what they'd done there. But going to Athens, and I remember going into this little Byzantine church, must have been probably 10th century, something like that, tiny, and being completely gobsmacked by the presence of God within the images or through the images. It's like the images were radiating a presence which was more than what they were, because they were all covered in soot. All you got were these sort of shadowy glimpses of the forms, but that sense of God's immanence was sort of saturating everything, and the image were very much part of that. So that sort of captured my interest, and I was just mesmerized by finding an art form that really embodied what I believed, not as an idea, but as a real presence. So then I was sort of messing around for years and years and years. Did some course with Igor Sondler. He was my first proper teacher.
It's a great book. I really, really treasure his book. It's great, isn't it? It's a classic. I'd like to see it reprinted.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I did a summer with him in Paris as a young man, but then it sort of went into abeyance. We didn't have the internet and things like that, so finding other people who are even interested in iconography was not easy. And then 2006, I came on one of your courses, and then a second one, and then you took me on as an apprentice. And that's where it really sort of took off. So there was sort of 20 years really of sort of messing around, I think is probably the best description. And then you gave me the opportunity to take it seriously, and then to go to become professional. And very soon after doing our time together, I ended up going to the Holy Land. And that sort of took things into a completely different direction. Because there you've got this sort of melting pot of all the different churches and its background and liturgies. And so I was able to sort of immerse myself in that and my iconography, I suppose, really became very much influenced by that.
For viewers out of interest, later on, Ian and I are going to talk about iconography in Palestine, and that we've shown on my Patreon site. You've got some interesting views, haven't you, Ian, on how high quality Palestinian work, say we have in Egypt, as we see now in St. Catherine's Monastery, wasn't necessarily painted in Constantinople. That's the assumption.
Exactly.
In the art historians. If it's really good, it couldn't possibly have been painted in Palestine. It must have been painted in Constantinople. So for those interested, we're going to be talking about that later. But carry on, sorry.
Yeah, so then I set up the Bethlehem Icon School, Bethlehem Icon Centre, and finished there in 2019. And now I live up in the Alps in Italy, where I can dedicate myself to online teaching, and just produced a book, handbook on icon painting, which really accompanies an online course that I teach, called the Academy Course in Icon Painting. So a lot of my time is sort of divided between teaching online and then my own painting work.
Well, thank you so much, Ian. That's great. And I highly recommend Ian's book. You can find it on your website, is that right?
Yes,
is that the best?
can.
Yeah. And what is your website address?
We're just about to bring out a hard book copy, hard book version, which will be retailing at half the price of the softback version. So it's going to be about £32.50. And that'll be coming out soon. And the website is www.eliasicons.co.uk.
That's Elias, E-L-I-A-S.
Yeah.
Elias.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for that intro. So when I contacted you about this podcast and looking at early British Romanesque art in particular, you mentioned this church you recently discovered, St. Michael's, Copford in Essex, which I myself came across recently. So let's concentrate on that, but we can refer to anything else we wish. Just a bit of background, just researching for this morning, I discovered that my great-great-grandfather, Alban Martin, had a bit of overlap with the later history of this church. As we'll see, it was painted in about 1130. And it was restored, inverted commas, in the Victorian times, about 1890, by a man called Daniel Bell. It just turns out that Daniel's brother, Alfred, was discovered by my great-great-grandfather, who then sent him to study under Sir Gilbert Scott, the great architect.
No.
And then Alfred went off to found Clayton and Bell, which was the major stained glass company in Victorian England. I had about 500 people working for them one point.
Gosh.
And so Daniel, who did this restoration work on this fresco that St. Michael was going to talk about, was the brother of this man who was whose career was launched by my great-grandfather. It's a small world, isn't it? Alban Martin. Yeah, small world. Lovely. Can you tell us a bit about the church, St. Michael's, Copford in Essex, and then you can show us more images of the wall painting, and then we can discuss what elements of this could be a sort of launching pad for both for painters of wall painting or frescoes or panel icons, but also, and this is the main emphasis of these podcasts for the Chichester workshop, is to inspire potential commissioners, priests, bishops, whoever, to commission art, and what sort of art to commission. I must say, I'm getting a bit tired of people saying we need more beauty in the churches, but don't add any more substance to that, because beauty nowadays is so subjective, isn't it? But we're talking about liturgical art that inspires prayer, that gives us a sense of the communion of the saints, of earthly worship participating in heavenly worship. So could you talk us through a bit about St. Michael's, Copford, show us some of the images and what struck you about it?
Okay. Well, I mean, I've just literally stumbled across this over in the last week. I mean, Aidan, you know that for a long time I've really been excited by the work of Matthew Paris as somebody who is English and has a really very interesting style that resonates with the sort of English landscape of church architecture, because I think iconography is one part of a whole. We tend to think of panel icons as icons and then they're put on a wall, like in an art gallery. But I think something that I think you taught me was, that the church is a complete space, architecturally, musically, liturgical language, liturgical ceremony, and the art is part of that whole. So for myself, when I'm trying to find inspiration for icons that I'm painting, especially if it's going to be for an English context, I want to really savor, to taste or to get the aroma of the worship that takes place in that space. And as you say, our contemporary situation is it's all a bit sort of, well, whatever we like. And so that's a very sort of, I think, thin gruel, really. And it's not terribly inspiring in the end. But when you look to that medieval landscape, you go anywhere in England and those medieval churches popping up everywhere in every village, and you go into them and the presence of God is there, even if nobody prays in them anymore, they're just really a tourist spot. They're saturated with that divine presence, and in the stillness you can taste it, you can feel it. Now obviously the art of that period sadly was almost all lost at the Reformation, but we do have these little glimpses. It might be, say, the stained glass in Canterbury Cathedral, it might be architectural details and so forth, statuary and stuff, which has maybe survived a little better. But very rarely do we actually see a church as it was used in that period, with its art in place and intact. So I was really quite thrilled stumbling upon Copford Church. And I sort of dug around trying to find some good photographs of the images and stuff inside. I've not had the chance to go and see it yet. I will have that. That's now on my bucket list. And what I think is really exciting about this, even though it has been restored, some of it quite heavily by the Victorians, and I think you can see in some of the images quite clearly it's a Victorian image. But then there's a lot of it, most of it, I think, that still has this real freshness of that medieval vision, that art is almost like a portal between heaven and earth. And I think one thing I've become more aware of, I think, in the last few years, is that our sense of the liturgy or of our religion, especially in a Western context, is very much about us. So it's about the community. It's about the hymnody talks about our experiences. It's sort of a very domesticated vision of God with us in the present, and we've lost the horizon of eternity. This is not such a problem, I think, in the Eastern churches, whether it's the Orthodox or Eastern Catholics, where, because it's just so ancient and it isn't played around with, it retains more of that authentic sort of medieval vision of heaven and earth being distinct and yet united. Whereas I think in the Western context, Anglicans, Roman Catholics and so forth, it's become a little bit too humanistic, and we've lost that sense of the transcendent.
It's interesting that G.K. Chesterton, as a rebuff to those who said, if something's old-fashioned, then get rid of it because it's old-fashioned to stultify. He said, well, if it's old, perhaps it's old because it's true and lasting. So why get rid of something just because it's old? And this is a good example of you can't reject something outright just under the rather shallow title of it. It's old-fashioned. The wheel is old. We still use it.
And I think subsequent to that is to say, well, just because you don't appreciate it doesn't mean to say there isn't anything there to be appreciated. And I think modern man is very good on the scientific, on, taking things apart, analysis. I mean, you look at the wonders of, say, atomic science and things like that, really good at that. But we're very bad at the transcendent. Whereas the medieval
if
world,
we're created to grow into God's image, then the very definition of a human person is to be more than just merely human, but to transcend being merely human and to be deified, to be united with Christ, to be a participant in the divine nature. And at least Gregor of Nyssa says that even in the age to come, when there's no sin to get in the way, we're still going to be growing from glory to glory. It struck me that in a lot of the Roman apsidal depictions, mosaics, this is from the first sort of 5th century through to the 10th, but actually all of them depict Christ coming out of the future. So you've got the brightly coloured clouds behind him, which always indicate that this is Christ coming to us from the future, like the sun rising. At the same time, Christ is present with us in this image, so he's with us in the community now. But of course, to depict Christ, we're also linking to the past, because we can depict God because he became flesh 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So in this one image, you got the past, present, and the future.
And I think that's the sense that time dissolves. And I think when we stand around the altar, we often just sort of get mesmerized by the present without seeing that the present at the liturgy encompasses everything. The time doesn't stop, it dissolves. And we're sort of caught up into something. If only we are able to, I suppose, be ascetical, to look beyond the immediacy of our senses and needs and stimulus, and to see what's just lurking beyond the surface, just out of sight. That intriguing sense of the Lord coming, saving us, redeeming us, drawing us into something far greater than we can imagine.
So we agree that liturgical art in its entirety, but we're concentrating now on visual liturgical art, should open our worship in the present into this worship of heaven and to eternity. So could we work now through how this is done so successfully in this particular St. Michael's Church? Because we know what we want to happen, we know the effect we want, but the question then is how to. So let's just say if I'm commissioning this bare church to be frescoed, and I'm a complete ignoramus, but I know that in my head, as you've said, that we want whatever we paint on the walls to direct us to the age to come, to affirm that Christ is with us, and affirm that God has become flesh and is among us. I don't know anything about liturgical art. What can this particular painting show me about how it's done? Can you talk us through details? Why is this so effective? And give us examples. So explain what's being depicted here and how it's depicted.
Okay, let me just fill the screen a little bit. Here we got Christ in glory, Christ in majesty, Christ the Pantocrator, could use all those names. This is this is in the apse over the altar. So this is defining what's happening in that space. Christ death as a king. You've got the angels holding Christ up. So we're definitely talking here about an otherworldly presence, a sacred presence, and the angels giving that evocation. Christ on a throne, so majesty, authority, power. And yet, this is a very, I think, dissolving image, if that makes sense.
What do you mean by dissolving?
That I'm not being confronted with a worldly king. If I think of a king in majesty, think of King Charles. It's his coronation, all those robes and everything's very solid and grand and, wonderful. You can really taste the authority of the figure. But here it's almost the opposite. It's sort of dissolving. The physicality is minimal.
How is that achieved stylistically?
I think first of all, if we think of garments being sensual, think of a sort of flowing robe, you get those sort of very sort of sinuous and how can you put it, sort of swirling forms, and we sort of bulk up the material with its velvets and its ermine and this sort of stuff. But if we look on this image, those lines indicate folds which are very thin. And they're all reduced down into something really very stark. It's what I call an ascetical aesthetic. The sensuality is ripped out. You're not trying to trick the imagination into feeling the sensuality of the material. You're simply being presented with the fact that he's dressed as a king. Likewise, the throne is monumental, it's solid, it makes a presence, but it's not quite not together in IKEA, but it's not, it doesn't have that magisterial feeling of the material. The matter is sort of having the life sucked out of it, so it's just sort of basic form. And so I think what happens, you feel the sense of the presence, the majesty of this figure, but it's a majesty that lies beyond the image as a physical form. So I don't know if this is making sense, Aidan.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think matter is obviously important, isn't it? That we have icons of Christ because God has become flesh and visible. But the material world, whilst being entirely real, and Christianity is not a dematerialization, nonetheless, the meaning of matter, as with the meaning of our bodies, is to go beyond itself. Itself is taken with it, like Christ descends to heaven in a physical body, and yet it's a transfigured physical body. So you're talking here about my favorite word, really, transfiguration. Transfiguration is real stuff that isn't just stuff, that it's stuff irradiated, transformed, saturated with the Holy Spirit, so creating creation together. So perhaps that's the weakness of, I don't know, Sistine Chapel, which is so physical that it's difficult perhaps to perceive the spirit in it. Purely abstract art, on the other hand, is just pure spirit with no flesh. I'm overstating the point here, but this is actually quite abstract, yet it's obviously a person. The angels are angels. Geometrical shapes, so it's a union, isn't it, of the visible and the invisible somehow.
And it's trying to do the impossible, really, which is to show that which is seen by the saints. You know, if the fathers, the way they talk about the way in which you can see far more clearly with true spiritual sight. You see the real nature of things and the glory of God in things, and that radiates. But if your vision isn't purified, you can't see that. So it's only a few people who reach that state. So we're trying to capture that vision for Joe Bloggs, Muggins in church, who's like slaving away with the spiritual life, trying to grow in grace, trying to enter into the deeper relationship with God, but is on the way, and trying to capture a little glimpse of that which a few people manage to see in this life, but which will be the vision of the saints in glory when it's So
it's the how we depict sacred events as well as what we depict, and you're saying it's important. It can this abstract style, let's call it, for want of a better term, can actually either transform our vision, so we look for the fire in the bush, as it were, or at least believe that there is a fire in the bush that I've somehow got to see for myself. So it sort of piques the spiritual curiosity, as it were. Whereas if it's too photographic, I see that every day. So what of it? I'll carry on my life as normal. But when I
Yeah.
see this strange sight, as the Bible says, Moses, when he saw the burning bush, he saw this strange sight and he stopped what he was doing, stopped his day-to-day work looking after sheep or goats, and he looks at this burning bush, strange sight, and then God speaks to him. So I'm just trying to sort of add up the things that make for good visual liturgical art. So we've got the sense that it's material, but yet it goes through the material, that it helps us to see differently. You're talking about helping us to see differently. And if we can't actually see initially, at least believe that there is another way of seeing rather than just the materialistic scientific. And that the way that the liturgical art depicts things can help transform this vision.
Yeah.
Good.
And I think there's another thing, and I think this is something that really very critical. A lot of, because our society is very cerebral, we quite often find people dealing with medieval art as though it's a sort of book of code, a code book. This means that, this means the other, this means the other. So I get students sort of saying, oh, well, what color means what? They want the list, you know. As though icons are sort of visual Dan Brown novels, you know, that you've got to go find all the little secret, and that will give you the meaning. But I think the point about the incarnation is that matter itself bears that divine imprint. So the art that we're doing has to embody the very thing it's pointing us to. So the nobility of the art needs to reflect the nobility of what is being shown.
Could you perhaps show us an image of the whole church? I've got one here myself, if you haven't got it, showing the unrestored Romanesque paintings, and at the end the apse, which has been restored more. And if you can blow that up, the top one is quite good. Could you expand on that a bit?
There we are.
So is that facing?
That's the west.
That's facing west, yeah. Could you have one facing east?
Yeah.
With the walls plus the apse, which you just shown to us.
That's
the apse.
Now what's happened? Where's that gone? I just had a little moment where my
just while you're finding that, it's an unusual church for Britain, where a lot of these places were destroyed or whitewashed over and then the plaster hacked off by the Victorians. This is a rare one, in that most of the walls remain covered, though the east wall was heavily repainted by my.
Well, that's, you can see there, that's the restored bit at the top, which looks so Victorian. And actually, you can see in that it's become much more sensual. The folds and everything. Whereas if we look at the imagery in the sanctuary, it's much less sensual.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. And you've got a shot of the whole nave facing west.
Yeah, I'm just going to scrudge through, see if I can find the image.
Going through those, I just love the way that these traditional images incorporate not just the angelic and the human realm, but also the geometric, mathematical realm and the vegetable realm and the animal realm. So these patterns here, some of them are geometric, some incorporate the rest of the kingdom. So I love that fact that the whole of creation is involved in, there we are, that's it, yeah. Right, it's composed there. So you can see the whole, every available surface here was painted. So when you went into a church like this, there might have been 20 people in church. You had the real sense, I'm sure, as I have when we go to fully fresco churches now, that you're actually participating and joining in a ceaseless worship of heaven. So it's not as though we start a service, but we just join in a service that has been going a long time and will continue to go forever in heaven. Yeah.
But you get that in the Western tradition very clearly at Easter with the Te Deum, because the services of Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Vigil of Holy Saturday, there's not an end on the Maundy Thursday or on the Holy Saturday. There's no blessing and dismissal. It just ends, and then just you come back and it continues. So it's this one whole liturgical celebration, even though we participate in this sort of fragmented moments. We're sort of popping in, but the whole thing is still going on. It's a very rich moment, which is Western liturgy tends to be a little too pared down to basics, I think, sometimes, and we lose that sense. But yeah, no, I think when you look at how it's an immersive experience, like we were talking at the beginning about architecture and the liturgical music, all of this, liturgy has its own specific vocabulary,
yes,
of which art is just as important as architecture,
yes.
or ceremonial, or indeed words.
It struck me in that matter how cathedrals, for example, will rightly spend a lot of energy and money and time on getting their choral liturgical art really to a high standard. But so often when it comes to visual art, very little money and investment is put into it. And when we do decide to beautify a church, we just get some well-known local artist or even international one and just hope for the best.
Yeah.
So all the rules, not rules, but the principles we have for sacred music, in other words, it's not just the text, but how that text is sung, stand really, really well. And people feel so profoundly moved, even if they didn't understand the words. Just the music itself embodies that spiritual life. When it comes to visual art, we have a completely different attitude. How this has come about, I don't know. Perhaps it's because with Henry VIII, our relationship to liturgical visual art has been broken.
And I think on a wider point, with the Enlightenment and the sort of growth of rationality, because this is certainly a real problem in Catholic liturgical contexts, where the emphasis is on thinking.
Yeah.
Whereas liturgy is something, even somebody who's disabled, for example, senses God's love for them by an immersion into something which maybe mentally they don't have the capacities to comprehend. But that's actually true of all of us. I mean, when we recite the creed, how many of us really understand what on earth we're talking about? I mean, I'm sure there are some people who know what homoousios means and all that sort of stuff, but even then, human intelligence, you can't comprehend the incomprehensible.
Yes.
But we sort of become immersed in that. And I think that's what people find when they listen to, say, Gregorian chant. Even if they're not religious people, they are taken to another place. There's a quality about it which is transcendent, and it articulates transcendence. And I think with our art in the church, we need to get back to the idea it's about an experience,
and not just
an idea,
and not in a temporary feeling experience, but an encounter that profoundly affects us. Do you think this is where the forgetfulness, the loss of the nous is vital here? Nous was translated as intellectus in the old days. Now intellectus just means Hebraically intellectual, but a lot of the church fathers talk about us being a union of body, soul, and spirit, but the nous is like sometimes defined as the eye of the heart, but that which encounters and knows directly. I suppose like falling in love. You might not know a lot about the woman you've fallen in love with, but you just fall in love and you sort of know them before you know facts about them. So this is the closest image I can get to the nous. It's defined by some as that faculty of the human person by which we know things directly and not in mediated ways. So could you go back to some of these close-up pictures here and talk through how you think these images, as it were, help us encounter God as experience rather than know about God, how they can actually waken up our noetic faculty so that we see an experience rather than just be given information about. Lots of close-ups as well for those who haven't got large screens.
This is the sanctuary. So this is where the altar is, where Christ is coming in the Eucharist to be there, truly present in the bread and wine, becoming his body and blood. And you have to remember that the people who were painting this really believed all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, we need to do a little bit of a sort of jump into that mindset where that's what's happening. But even if we don't have that faith and we're just looking at this, what we're seeing, first of all, there is the rhythm. And I think you mentioned about geometry and the way in that geometry is used in the space. And if there is order in creation, that has come from God.
Mm.
He creates order out of chaos. That's Genesis. So when we see a church which is decorated, it's not just about a sort of nice painting that's put somewhere. It's about how the space has a rhythm to it.
Mm.
And it's a rhythm which resonates with the creator.
Interesting.
Music resonates on the ear.
Jonathan Pageau, in his symbolic word, often talks about the fractal nature of truth, that the patterns, the rhythms we see in the large scale are repeated in the small scale. No matter what scale you're at, these same rhythms occur. So that's what you're talking about there. You've got the rhythm of the liturgy, and that's reflected and embodied in the rhythm of the visual art, the paintings and the colors and the arrangement. Mm.
And at least it should resonate with the basic mathematical order with which God has created his creation. It's there for us to discover. If we want to be co-creators with him, well, we better take the master's lead. And you find that through sacred geometry or geometry. So if we look at the space here, it's beautifully arranged. With the three windows, the three spaces breaking out into the light, and the way in which that apse is holding everything together. The proportion of the figure of Christ dominates everything, but it doesn't overwhelm.
Yes, good point.
It's
and
not
the designs of the
violating
paintings
the
have
space.
respected the architectural space, haven't they? They haven't sort of painted it in the studio on paper and then stuck it on.
Exactly.
They've respected the architectural shapes and responded to that.
And you can see the angels, for example. Lovely. You see the angel over there over the window.
Yeah.
And you see how those wings are just sort of echoing the shape of the where it's cut into the ceiling.
Yes.
It doesn't feel as though it's sort of been pushed in. It belongs. They're holding each other. So the visual forms are working together in a very tranquil, peaceful way. I think one of the things which I love about this is the way in which you're not distracted by something not being in the right place.
Yes.
So your eye is resting on Jesus.
Yes, everything's sort of pointing in a certain direction, isn't it? Like a church, well, if it's a basilica, will be definitely moving toward the east, or if it's a domed church, Byzantine church, there's a direction upwards and downwards, the incarnation coming down, but also our movement forwards. So there's a direction, and everything's, in this case, being directed toward the mandorla with Christ in it.
And I think that's one of the important tests I try to do with my own work is, is there anything that's jarring the flow? Jesus is the center of everything. Everything comes from him and returns to him. So visually, Christ has to have that. It's like the toll of the bell. It's the rhythm of the music. Is it 3/4 time or whatever it is? Christ is the absolute cornerstone of everything. So visually, he has to draw you in, and you have to find yourself with him without even thinking about it. It shouldn't be a mental journey.
Yeah.
It should be a natural experience which we are taken on through our eyes, through our senses. And everything here from the window shape to the arrangement of the saints between the windows as like little columns, on which is placed this dome, which is actually Christ's throne.
Mm.
And everything is flowing from that space and back to that space.
So it's
Echoes.
an important principle. I'm going back to my image of I'm an ignoramus, but I'm a priest who's been just having given £100,000 by a donor who said, I want all this money to be spent on painting your church, and I don't know anything about art. So I've come to you and asked you to give me, let's say, 5 principles to have in mind. So that's one of them. We talked earlier about some, but that's a really important one. The flowing, the direction of everything. And secondly, it should relate to the architectural space. It shouldn't be imposed on it, but should respond to, hopefully, the church I've been given this money to fresco or commissioned someone to fresco is an interesting shape. But whatever, the painting's got to respond to that shape, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Not to some other ideal shape, but to that shape, those spaces.
Yeah.
Could you, I want to tie up in a few minutes. Could you I saw one image you've got there, which is a fairly close-up of one particular angel or saint, just so we can get down to the nitty-gritty of the stylistic features of how the faces are done. I think it's an angel or something, just with a few lines. I was really impressed when I looked there. So that one there is all right, yeah. As long as it's not too Victorianized, it's one of the ones closest to
that's
the original.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a few minutes, just talk through us why you think this is more successful than, say, a highly wrought, more photographic image of an angel. How does this particular way of painting, which you could say is a bit focused, some might say in a derogatory way, this is a bit folkish and but simplistic, isn't it? Now, why would this be more likely to help me spiritually than more photographic, what I sort of image say?
Okay, the first thing I think is because it doesn't become an end in itself.
Okay.
It's not playing with my imagination. So it's not dishonest. It's not an illusion of an angel, and it's painted so realistically that in my imagination I'm creating that angel. It's true to form. We can see what it is very, very clearly, very, very simply, minimalistically, totally, as minimal as you could probably get, really. It's just a matter of lines, not even, and a little bit of shadowing. It's playful, it's elegant. The folds in the garment I particularly like. That changes it from being a cartoon. It's not a cartoon. It is actually, in a way, an embodiment of something that is real, and it's true to that reality. But it's so simple you can't stop with it.
Yes.
It's giving you a taste of more, and so you yearn to really see what's there. Without the actual painted forms getting in the way. And that's why I think it works so well.
St. John of Damascus, I think, said that an image is both like and unlike what it depicts. If it tries to be too like, then it basically tries to reproduce, whereas I suppose a good image keeps reminding us that that this thing, in this case, is angel, the saint, far surpasses anything we can possibly imagine. Someone said that the 4 living creatures depicted in the Old and New Testament are, to say bizarre, but it's really clear that this is not trying to describe to you what these strange angels are like. It's quite the opposite, saying that these angels in reality are just so beyond any comprehension that this rather bizarre image of oxen with wings and all that are actually closer to reality, because they're so reminding us that reality is actually so distant from our idols. Do you think we can have an idol that's an image in our imagination, a caricature?
Definitely.
Yeah, interesting.
Definitely. No, I think anything that becomes our creation and we think we trap the divine or the holy inside it creates an idol.
Yeah.
because God is uncircumscribable, so it's completely ludicrous. But if God himself chooses to reveal himself, to enter into, to pour himself out into and through his creation, that's a totally different ballgame. So I think with the genius of the medieval vision was they understood that was their language. It was their experience. They didn't even have to worry about it. Of course, it was one of those, well, of course, sort of things, in the same way that we think about science and, you know, analyzing things and microscopes and how it all comes together. Their world was one where they really got how the divine and the temporal work together.
Yes. Yeah.
They didn't maybe do so well on how the material world came together, and, you know, all sorts of bits of magic and, you know, superstition and all that sort of stuff getting muddled in with that. But they understood the way in which the two realities, as it were, the greater reality and this lesser reality, hold each other.
That's really helpful. Yeah.
When we're now trying to paint, is our culture doesn't understand this. So the real challenge, I think, for us is how you take this and make this accessible to, say, a Catholic congregation, you know, in England. You know, how do our people who have got maybe a very worldly faith, if I can put it like that, where, you know, even things like relics and all the, oh, well, those just bits of bones, that's very macabre, and oh, not into that. No. Or where, you know, the focus is so much on, you know, the here and now, then imbued with photography. This is another issue, and it's a whole thing in itself. But, you know, our society has never been so saturated with images.
Yes.
You know, everybody picks up a magazine, looks on the screen, images are everywhere. So we're just filled with this, and we all have mobile phones, we all take our selfies. You know, we're used to the photographic image as being true. You know, the photograph never lies. So how do we bridge this massive gap in how we work visually, without it just people saying, like you said, oh, well, this looks very primitive or folky. Oh, I like that. You know, this profound work reduced down to, you know, personal likes.
And if we consider the art of the church as, or the church walls as like the walls of paradise, because paradise means a walled park. And if we can't reveal the fullest possible Christian vision in this one space where the church has got total control, we can put whatever we want in the church. We can't get it right there. Where are we going to get it right?
Yeah, exactly.
If we don't get it right in this box, let's call it, where we're free to do what we want, more or less, then when we get into the world where we're bombarded by all sorts of secular things, well, we've got no hope at all. So this is our paradise. So if we can just finish off then by I've come to you as a consultant, all right, I've been given this money, and we've got 2 minutes before my train goes. So you've got 2 minutes to give me 6 principles that I've got to go away with to know who to commission and what brief to give them. Obviously, I'm not going to tell the man exactly what to paint or the woman what to paint, but I need to give him or her the principles. So could you summarize what we've been speaking of the last half hour? What are the 6 important things?
First of all, you want somebody who deals with the whole.
Okay.
You want somebody who understands the wholeness of liturgical celebration, visual, musical, linguistic. They need to have a holistic sense.
Good.
Needs to be somebody who can articulate a spiritual presence, a transcendent presence. We're not talking them being saints, but they at least have to understand that that's what they're trying to do. On a deeper level, I think they need to have a vision of how Christ relates to that particular community and its celebration.
Okay. It's rooted in place and in situation.
Exactly. So incarnation, incarnation, incarnation as a lived reference point. They also need to be good artists.
Okay.
They need to be able to handle color. So we didn't talk about that in the what we were looking at, but I mean, very minimal palette, but wow, doesn't it work? This person knows how to make very humble stuff really come alive.
On that point, it seems that Master Hugo may have painted this. He's my great hero. I mean, he did the Bury St. Edmund Bible.
Yeah.
And probably made the what's now called the Cloisters Cross. So he's a real master.
Yeah.
Whether or not he did, I don't know, but that's what a lot of scholars think.
Interestingly, this period of English history produces the most outstanding artists. You know, it's about a century and a half.
Golden age, isn't it?
Yeah, unbelievable. And then it sort of fades out again, and we don't really get great English artists until the Renaissance and so forth. But so these guys are really on the button. And I think if you're going to have art in the church, the public space of the Christian community, it needs to be competent.
Yes, competent.
It's not.
So you give me 4 points. My train's going to leave in a minute.
That's the 4. That's the 4.
I need 2 more now.
That's egging it.
Oh, come on, I'm pushing you.
Okay, so I would say then you need somebody who's got a sense of fun, a sense of playfulness, because you want the image to really inspire, not just tell a story, not just be mechanical.
It's got to be what it depicts in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you may not have somebody who's a very saintly, holy person, but somehow they grasp what the destination is, and they can hold all those things together. So I think that would be the final point there, is you want somebody who's Catholic, is comprehensive. And that is everything that the Christian faith is about. They need to somehow be on top of.
Oh, that's really wonderful. I've really enjoyed this, Ian. It's been really inspiring. And I hope your listeners out there will take to heart what Ian spoke to us about, and God willing, there be more people who see the importance of visual liturgical art, because as we were saying earlier, that if we can't do it in our church, in our worship, then we're not going to do it in the world. I often return to this vision of Ezekiel where he sees this temple, and underneath the threshold of the temple comes a spring, and then that spring becomes a deep river, and wherever the river goes, it brings life, but it starts from the temple.
Yes. One of my favorite images, actually, and I've just been using that in an icon I just dispatched to a customer. So I totally agree. There's a lovely note to stop on.
That's lovely to stop. Thank you, Ian, and thank you for all your viewers for joining us, and look forward to some more. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Aidan.
Bye-bye.